The border road ran northeast out of the small mail post at Hattering for 940 miles, and Marsen Hall had walked it twice a year for 11 years before the autumn he met the York. And after that autumn, he walked it for the rest of his life and never took another route. He was 46 that year. He had been a mail carrier on the long frontier circuits since he was 25, and on the border road since he was 35. And his pack, which weighed 38 pounds when it was full of the season's letters and small parcels, and which he carried in a long oilcloth wrap with a leather strap across his chest, had worn a smooth, pale callus on his left collarbone that he sometimes touched in the dark when he could not sleep. He walked. He walked at the same pace he had walked at 30, because the body learns a pace and forgets how to walk any other way. And the pace was 3.5 miles to the hour, and 28 miles to the day on flat ground, and 22 miles to the day in the hills. And the border road was hills for 2/3 of its length, and Marsen Hall had measured the border road in his own footsteps so many times that he could tell by the angle of the shadow of the hat brim on the dust at noon exactly where on the road he was. He carried a small canvas tent and a wool blanket and a folded oilcloth and a small iron kettle and a tin cup and a folding pocket knife and a long-barreled flintlock pistol he had never fired at any living thing, and a small leather-bound book in which he kept the addresses and the route and the dates. And he carried these things in addition to the mail, and the total weight came to 52 pounds when the pack was full. And he had carried 52 pounds for so long that the absence of 52 pounds at the end of a long day felt to him like falling. And he had once, on a layover at the post in Eastreach, taken his bedroll out into the yard and slept under the stars, with the pack still on so that he would not feel the falling. He met the York on the 7th morning of the autumn run, in the 3rd week of the long month they called the lean month in his country, in the section of the road known as the half-burnt mile, because a fire had taken half the spruce on the eastern side 40 years before, and the new growth had come in only on the western side, and the road still ran between green pines on one side and gray burnt stumps and slow young saplings on the other. He was walking with the sun behind him and the long shadow of his pack falling out ahead of him on the dust, and he came around the slow turn at the foot of the burnt side ridge, and there was a person sitting on a flat gray rock at the verge of the road. He stopped. He had not seen another person on this section of the road in 22 crossings of it. The person on the rock was an orc. She was sitting very still with her elbows on her knees and her chin on her folded hands and her dark eyes on the road. And when she saw him, she did not move, except to lower her hands and lay them flat on her knees. And Marsen Hall, who had spent 11 years learning to read the small signs of a person who is or is not a danger, read the small sign of her hands going to her knees, and understood that she had laid them down on purpose for him to see them. He did not draw the pistol. He had not drawn it in the 11 years of the route. He stood at his pace, and he looked at her, and after a moment he lifted one hand to the brim of his hat, the way he greeted the postmaster's wife at Eastreach, and he said, "Morning." She inclined her head. "Morning," she said. Her voice was rough, but the word was clean. He took 2 paces forward and stopped. He set the pack down on the dust at his feet, because it was easier to talk without the pack on, and he straightened up and looked at her properly. She was perhaps 30. She was wearing a long-sleeved, knee-length wool tunic, the color of old smoke, with a worn, dark leather belt at the waist, dark trousers that had once been good and were now patched at both knees, and leather wraps on her feet that were also patched. Her hair was long and dark and braided once down her back. Her skin was the bright, vivid green of a young leaf in summer, deeper in the hollows. She had a small bundle beside her on the rock, wrapped in a square of gray wool. She had no visible weapon. She was thin. He had seen thin, and he had seen hungry, and he had seen the particular thinness of a long road. And she was the third. "You walking?" he said. "I was," she said. "Yesterday I was. Today I have been sitting on this rock since before dawn." "Why?" "Because if I keep walking the way I am walking, I will not reach where I'm going." He nodded once. "Where are you going?" "Northeast." "How far?" She named a place. He had heard of it. It was a small valley 3 weeks beyond the end of the border road, deep in the Orc country across the upper pass. He had carried a letter to a man at the trading post just south of that valley once, 4 years before. He took off his hat. He set it on the pack. He put his hands in the pockets of his coat, because his shoulders had needed the relief of the pack off, and the pockets were the next best thing. "Border Road runs northeast for 6 more days at my pace," he said. "Then it crosses the upper pass and runs another 8 days, to the post at Coldspring. Past Coldspring it ends. From Coldspring to where you are going is a week, near as I figure." "A week," she said. "Yes. I have been walking 31 days. "You are halfway." She closed her eyes for a moment. "I do not have another 31 days, she said. He looked at her a long count. He looked at the road northeast. He looked at her bundle on the rock. He looked at his pack at his feet. He understood, with the slow, clear understanding of a man who had carried 52 pounds for 11 years and knew what 52 pounds did to a body that had not been born to carry it. That what she meant was not that she did not have the time, but that she did not have it in her. That 31 more days of walking the way she was walking would put her in a verge ditch at sunset somewhere on the upper pass with no one to see her. He picked up his hat. He put it on. He picked up the pack. He shouldered it. He looked at her. "You walk at my pace," he said, "and I will walk you to Coldspring. From Coldspring you can take the Trader Road over the pass, and you will not be alone for the last week. There are people on that road." She did not speak for a long count. Then she said, "Why?" He thought about it. He had not asked himself the question yet. He had said the words before he had asked. He stood with the pack on his shoulders and the dust of the road on his boots, and he thought about it. And after a moment, he said, "Because I have walked this road for 11 years, and I have not walked it with anyone, and I think today is the day I would like to." She looked at him. She did not smile. She picked up the bundle from the rock, and she stood up, and she was a hand shorter than him, and she came down the small slope of the rock to the road, and she stood beside him on the dust, and she said, "Yorka, of the Greyleaf clan, beyond the upper pass." "Marsen," he said, "of the post at Hattering. I carry the mail." She looked at the pack. "How much does it weigh?" 52 pounds today, he said. "It will weigh 39 by the time we reach Coldspring. The mail goes out as we walk. People take their letters. The pack lightens." She nodded. They began to walk. They walked that day for the rest of the morning, and through the noon and into the afternoon, and Marsen Hall held the pace at 3 miles to the hour, because she was thinner than he was, and he watched her without watching her. The way he had watched the postmaster's old terrier on the days The dog had walked with him out of the post and had needed to stop sometimes, and at the end of the afternoon, when the sun was low, he stopped at a small, clear stream that ran across the road from the spruce side, and he laid down the pack, and he said, 24 miles today. We should have done 28. We will do 24 every day until you are stronger. Then we will see. She did not argue. He thought she would argue. He was glad she did not. He made the camp the way he made it every night of the 11 years. He rolled out the canvas tent and pinned it with the 4 iron stakes and pinned the back to the spruce side bank so the wind that came down the road in the night would not take it. He gathered dry wood from the burnt side and laid it in the iron pit travelers had been using for 50 years at this stop. He filled the kettle from the stream and set it over the fire on the iron hook. He took out the small bag of oats and the small twist of paper with salt and the smaller twist with sugar, and he made the porridge of the road, which was thicker than he liked it and saltier than was good for him, because 11 years on the road had taught him that a man who is going to walk 28 miles tomorrow needs salt in his porridge tonight. He made enough for 2. He set a tin cup of porridge on a flat stone at her side of the fire, and he ate his own from the iron pot to save washing, and they ate without speaking. And when she was done, she carried the cup to the stream, and washed it, and brought it back, and laid it on the stone. And she sat against the spruce side bank and looked at the fire. He laid the wool blanket on her side of the tent. He had only one. He had not, in the morning when he had told her she would walk to Coldspring, thought through the small problem of one blanket. He laid it on her side, and he laid the oilcloth on his side, and he understood that the oilcloth was a poor blanket, and that the spruce side air came cold through a tent in the lean month. And he understood also that he had walked the road in colder seasons than this with only the oilcloth, and would walk it in colder seasons than this again. She watched him lay the blanket, and watched him lay the oilcloth, and she said in the same level voice she had used on the rock, "We can share the blanket. We are both clothed. There is no impropriety on the road." He looked at her. Her dark eyes were on his, without challenge. He thought about it. He nodded. They shared the blanket. He slept on the spruce side of the tent, and she slept on the burnt side of the tent, and the wool blanket was wide enough for both of them, with 2 hands' breadth between them. And the first night was cold, but it was not as cold as the oilcloth would have been, and Marsen Hall slept the way he had slept at 20, which was the way a man sleeps who has set down the day's weight and trusts the morning to begin. The second day they walked 26. He had said 24, but she walked 26 before she sagged, and he stopped them at a clearing a half-mile short of the next camp and made the camp early, and saw her color come back over the porridge. The third day they walked 28 without her sagging and without his asking her to. By the 4th day she could carry a small portion of the pack, the canvas tent rolled by itself, 4 pounds, on a thin leather strap across her own shoulder. And he did not refuse the offer, because he understood that to refuse it would be to insult her. By the 5th day they were walking at his old pace of 3.5 miles to the hour, and they had begun to talk. They talked about the road first. She asked him how he had become a mail carrier. He told her his father had carried mail before him on a different circuit much further south, and his father's father had been a wagon driver on a salt road that no longer existed, and that his own first run as a hired carrier had been a short 3-day route between 2 villages he could no longer find on a map because the villages had been abandoned in a drought 10 years ago. He asked her how she had come to be on the border road. She said she had been taken in a raid on her clan's outer pasture 11 months before and had been sold twice and had escaped from the second master in the spring and had walked north for 7 months by stages, staying with a tinker for a while, with a charcoal burner for a while, with a freed woman who had hidden her in a root cellar through the height of summer when the thief-takers had been on the roads, and that she had reached the southern end of the border road 31 days ago and had decided to walk the road northeast because the road would take her closer to her people than any other path she knew, and that she had walked it alone because she had not known anyone she could trust to walk it with her until she had stopped to rest on a flat gray rock at the foot of the burnt-side ridge and had seen a thin man with a long pack and a quiet hat-brim greeting come around the turn. He nodded. He did not speak for a long count after that. Then he said, 11 months. Yes, 11 months is a long time. It is. I'm sorry. She looked at him. What for? I do not know how to answer that, he said. I am sorry that the 11 months happened. I am not the man who made them happen, and I cannot fix the months that have already passed. But I can carry the tent for the next 9 days, and I can boil the water tonight, and I cannot be one more thing the road did to you. That is what I am sorry for and what I will do about it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Thank you. He did not answer. They walked. The 6th day was hard rain. The border road in the lean month had a rain that came sideways out of the northeast and that hit the burnt side of the road first and turned the dust to a thin, slick mud that wanted to hold a boot for a quarter second longer than the boot wanted to leave. And Marsen Hall had walked in this rain on 12 crossings of the road, and he set his pace 1/3 slower in this rain, and he did not stop. They walked 7 hours in the rain that day. Yorka walked beside him without complaint. She had pulled the hood of her wool tunic up around her face, and she had taken the oilcloth from his pack. He had given it to her without asking, and she had wrapped it across her shoulders against the rain, and she walked with her head bent and her green hands in the cuffs of her sleeves, and at the end of the 7 hours, when they came to the small stone shelter at 3 Stones Pass, where the postal company had built a low-roofed lean-to 40 years before for the carriers, she sat down on the stone bench inside and pulled the wraps off her feet and looked at the bare green soles and laughed once, very short, and said, I have new feet. Her feet were rubbed raw at the heel and the ball of the foot. He looked at them. He had a small tin of bear grease in the pack that he carried for his own feet on the long crossings. He took it out. He held it out to her. He said, This is for that. You rub it in tonight before you sleep and again in the morning before the wraps go on. By Coldspring you will have proper feet again. She took the tin. She held it in her green hand and looked at it a moment. Then she said, in a voice that was different from any voice she had used yet, How long have you carried bear grease? 11 years. And you are giving it to me. I have a small jar in the camp at Coldspring. I have walked there from here on raw feet before. She pressed the tin between her 2 hands as though she would have liked to keep it on her chest a moment longer. Then she opened it. She rubbed the bear grease into her feet, and Marsen looked away to give her the privacy of it. And she put the wraps back on, and they ate the porridge, and they slept, and the rain fell on the slate roof of the stone shelter all night, and the wind came up the road and rattled the iron stakes of the canvas they had pitched inside the shelter against the cold. And Yorka of the Gray Leaf clan slept under the wool blanket that night, with bear grease on her feet, and Marsen Hall on the other side of the tent, with 2 hands' breadth between them. And Marsen Hall lay awake for a quarter of an hour, listening to the rain and thinking, with a clarity that surprised him, that he had been alone for 11 years on this road and had not understood, until tonight, that being alone was not the same thing as being at peace. The 7th day was the river. The border road crossed the slow brown river called Long Water, at a wooden bridge that had been built in the 2nd year of the route, and rebuilt twice in the 11 years Marsen had walked it. And the bridge was passable, but the river was up from the rain, and the bridge was wet, and 3 of the planks were soft. He walked her across one plank at a time. He held her hand because he was the one who knew which planks were soft, and she held his, because crossing a wet bridge over a brown river was a different country from the dust road. And on the other side they sat on a stump for a quarter of an hour, and they did not let go of each other's hands at first because neither of them had thought to. When she did let go, she said, "I have not held a hand in a long time." "I have not held a hand in a long time either," he said. They walked. The 8th day they came to the small post settlement at Mid-Hattering, where the road crossed the only proper village on the route. He had told her in advance that they would stop there for the morning, that he had 19 letters to deliver and a small parcel for the postmaster's wife, and that he would be inside the post for perhaps an hour, and that she could wait at the spring outside the village if she preferred, or she could come into the village with him, and that whichever she chose, he would not be more than the hour. She came into the village. She walked one pace behind him through the small main street, and the people of Mid-Hattering, who had grown used over 11 years to seeing Marsen Hall pass through with the mail, looked at the York walking one pace behind him, and they did not stare, and they did not greet. And Marsen understood that what they were doing was the careful frontier reading of him by them, the quiet assessment of whether the long, thin man they had known to be reliable for 11 years was still the man they thought he was, if he had an orc walking one pace behind him. And at the post, the postmaster, a small gray man named Belric, who had given Marsen tea every autumn for 11 years, looked at Yorka once, and looked at Marsen once, and said, "Tea!" And Marsen said, "Two." And Belric said, "Two it is." And the small gray man went into the back room and came back with 2 cups. And that was the whole of the assessment. And Yorka drank her tea standing at the counter beside Marsen while he handed over the mail, and when they left the village, she walked at his side instead of one pace behind, and she did not put it into words, but he understood that something had shifted. The 9th day they did 30 miles. The 10th day they did 30. The 11th day they did 26, because there was a long climb up the southern face of the upper pass, and he had set the pace slower out of habit and out of care. And she did not protest. And at the camp that night she said, "We are going faster than we should." He looked at her. "Are we?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because in 3 more days I will reach Coldspring. And at Coldspring you will walk on to the post, and I will turn east onto the Trader Road. And after that, I will not see you again." He thought about that. He had been thinking about it, without thinking about it, for several days. He did not speak right away. He set the kettle on the fire, and he watched the water come slow to the boil. And after a long time he said, "What if I came east with you instead?" She looked at him. He had not planned the sentence. He listened to it again in the air between them, and he tested it against the shape of his life. The 11-year route, the pack with the smooth, pale callus on his collarbone, the small one-room cabin he kept at Hattering that was empty for 8 months of the year, the postmaster who would have no replacement for him in less than a season, the mail that wanted carrying. And he tested it the way a carpenter tests a beam, by setting his weight against it. And the beam held. She said, "You have a route." "I have walked the route 11 years, he said. "It will be there for the man who walks it after me." "You have a life." "I have a life that walks. The walking is the life. The road I walk is a small thing inside of that." She did not speak for a long count. Then she said, "I do not know what is at the end of my road." "Neither do I," he said. "I have not walked east of Coldspring." "You would walk east of Coldspring with me." "Yes." "Why?" He thought about it. He had thought about the question at the rock on the 7th morning, and he had thought about the question through 10 more days of walking, and he had a better answer for it now than he had had then. "Because I have carried the mail for the people of the border road for 11 years, he said, "and the people of the border road have been good to me in their distant way. And the route has been honest work, and I do not regret 1 mile of any of it. But I have also been alone for 11 years on the long sections, and I had not known it. And I had built a life around not knowing it, and I would rather walk a road I do not know with someone than walk a road I know without anyone again." She looked at him. The fire made a small, soft sound between them. After a long count, she said, "I would not refuse the company." He nodded. The 12th day they walked 26. The 13th day they walked 24. Because the upper pass was steep, and because they had stopped speaking of Coldspring as the end of the road, and the not speaking of it had given them the kind of slow, long, companionable hours that had not had a place in either of their lives for many years. They came down out of the pass on the morning of the 14th day. The post at Coldspring was a small log building with a slate roof and a bell on the post outside. And the postmaster, an old woman named Tay, who had been a carrier herself in her time, and who knew Marsen Hall's pace by the dust on his boots, came out of the front door when the dog inside set up the small barking it set up only for him. And she stood on the porch with her arms folded and watched them come down the last quarter-mile of the road. And when they reached the porch, she looked at the orc walking at Marsen's side, and she looked at Marsen, and she said, "You're slow." "I had company," Marsen said. "Did you?" she said. "I did." "That is the 3rd time in 11 years you have been slow." "Yes. The other 2 were the time you broke your foot and the time you carried the dying man down out of the pass." "Yes." She looked at Yorka. Yorka inclined her head. Tay inclined hers. Tay looked back at Marsen. "You staying the night?" "We are going east," Marsen said. "Both of us. To the country, past the trader road." Tay looked at him for a long count. Then she said, "I have known you to be a stupid man on 3 occasions. None of them today. Come in. There's tea." They went in. They had tea. Tay gave them a small parcel of dried beef and 3 small loaves of hard bread and a stoppered tin of bear grease without comment, and she looked at Yorka and said, "There is a clan east of the upper pass on the north slope of the dry valley that has good land and bad winters. Grayleaf, I think they call themselves." "That's my people," Yorka said. "I have heard their songs. I have not been there. Will you carry word back?" "If I am still walking, yes." "That'll do," Tay said. They left at dawn. The trader road ran east out of Coldspring through the upper country and into the York lands, and Marsen Hall, who had carried 52 pounds for 11 years on the border road, set out at a slower pace than he had walked at any time in his life, and was content to. They walked 19 days east. They reached the small valley of the Greyleaf clan in the lean month's last week. Yorka was met at the edge of the valley by a tall orc man with gray at his temples who turned out to be her father's brother, and there was a long, quiet recognition that took place in their own tongue, and that Marsen Hall did not need to be told the meaning of. And then she turned to him and she introduced him formally in the words of her clan. And the tall orc man laid one green hand on Marsen's shoulder and inclined his head and said, in clean, accented human speech, "You are welcome in the Greyleaf Valley for the rest of your days." Marsen Hall stayed 7 weeks. Then he walked back to Coldspring alone in the middle of winter, and he resigned the route formally to Tay, who had already hired a young man to take it, and he walked south down the border road one last time at his old pace of 3.5 miles to the hour and 28 miles to the day. And he handed in the pack at Hattering, and he closed up the small one-room cabin he kept there, and he walked back northeast. He took 14 days. He had taken 14 days the first time, too. He walked the border road for the rest of his life on the eastbound run only, twice a year, carrying small packets and letters between the post at Coldspring and the small valley of the Greyleaf. And he never carried anyone's mail south of Coldspring again, and he never took another route. He died many years later in the small cabin he had built with Yorka at the edge of the Greyleaf Valley, with her hand on his and the long pack hanging on its peg by the door for the last time. And outside the cabin, a soft fall of new snow was just beginning, and the small gray and brown bird that had sat on the rail of the porch every morning for 9 winters was sitting on it that morning too. And it did not know that anything had changed, and Yorka of the Greyleaf clan, who had been walking alone toward home on a flat gray rock at the foot of the burnt-side ridge 31 days into a 38-day journey, sat with him for the long, quiet hour, and then stood up and walked to the door and opened it and let the new snow into the cabin for a little while, the way her grandmother had taught her to, so that the road outside would know that the man who had walked it was now done walking. He had walked the border road for 14 days with an orc. He had never taken another route. That was all. That was everything. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like. It helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Greenbound.